Hello, everybody. Thank you for watching UC.gov at the 18th edition of Bend Film Festival. We are very honored to have the filmmakers with us to do a short discussion. My name is Celine. I'm head of programming at Bend Film, and I have here with me Christy Cooper, director-producer of this film, and producer Olivia Ahnemann, also with us. Thank you for coming and joining us for this discussion. So I want to start with why, Christy, for you, this one, why the decision from switching from academia into filmmaking? And like, what did you feel the film's unique contribution to your goals as an academic and as a scientist? How did that evolve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was living and working in Europe. I have a PhD in neuroscience and was working in the stem cell field. And my initial kind of interest in moving more towards communication and storytelling kind of was spurred by the Bush-Kerry election, when the whole topic of debate became stem cells and people were voting on an issue that they really had no idea around, and education around stem cells is extremely limited. So that kind of over the course of the coming years then kind of transitioned into me working on public awareness and understanding of science, working on an EU interdisciplinary grant of creating traveling science fairs. And then I wanted to figure out how could I build storytelling more into the work that I was doing. And I found this program at Montana State University that offered an MFA in science and nature filmmaking. And so I moved back to the US and got my MFA in science and nature filmmaking, thinking that I would primarily be working on like hardcore science docs, which didn't end up actually really happening, because I think my heart and my passions are more pulled towards justice issues. But I think a lot of the principles that I bring as a scientist from my research and the background that I had can definitely be applied to these stories that I really like to follow.
In this project in particular, how did you find your background helping, either just understanding the subject matter or talking to your subjects or even editing? Like how did you find it specifically helpful?
Well, first of all, I think it gave me, especially with some of the experts who were scientists or had scientific background, it's kind of like an easier foot in the door to say, hey, I have a scientific background too, and we have something in common, and I can understand the terminology that they're talking about. But I think more importantly, the MFA that I got in learning how to tell stories around complicated science topics or nature conservation topics, I think I was directly able to apply to complicated legal, a complicated legal story, and be able to tell a story in the same way. The principles, the tools, the strategies that you might use to tell a complicated scientific story, I think were absolutely applicable to telling this story, which has a very complicated storyline with very complicated case with a lot of legal terms and things that happened, in the story that most people, the general public does not have a great understanding for.
And how did you guys get together with Olivia? What's your background, Olivia, and how did you guys find each other? Was it, I guess I want to also ask about the starting point of the project, where who had the idea, who brought it to whom, and how did it all come together?
Well, so Christy started working on this project back in 2015, and I joined the film in 2019. I guess. I think that's right. So Christy had been holding this film and this story and these relationships for a long time by herself, and really had been one man banding it, not entirely, but carrying a lot of the load on her own. And then I came off another project, a climate change film called The Human Element in 2019. And some colleagues from that film um, had their eye on like Christie's project and were interested in supporting it in various ways. And through those relationships, she and I came together. And I wasn't sure at the time if I was ready to dive into another film around climate change, but Christie's sort of take on the film, and it's not a film about, I mean, it is a film about climate change, but it's not a film about climate change. It's a film about constitutional rights. It is an intimate story about a complex legal case. It's about these kids standing up for their rights. And so it was very different look at the issue with a different set of solutions than other stories on the same issue. So I was really intrigued by it, and particularly intrigued by what I call the whodunit side of it, like looking back at all of that evidence against the government. So there was that investigative journalism piece also. So that's how I got. So I came on board most of the way through production. I mean, I think there were probably a handful of shoots left, and it was before, about 6 or 7 months before we started in the edit room. And it's been a really great collaboration. It's been awesome. We've really enjoyed working together and seeing this film to the end.
Very cool. And Christy, when you first, what was the starting point? How did you connect with the subject, and how did the story come to you in the beginning, before Olivia's contribution part started in the whole project?
Yeah, so I guess my history with the story goes back all the way to 2010, 11. When I was in grad school, I was connected to Witness, Peter Gabriel's social justice human rights organization. And I joined a project to create 10 short films about young people who were suing their state governments. And the legal team that was representing these young people was Julia's organization, Our Children's Trust. So I worked with 10 young people from around the country, helping to create these short stories. And so it gave me, I mean, it was my first exposure to working with minors on camera, which is one beast in and of itself, but also my introduction to climate litigation and using the court system as, an avenue towards seeking climate justice. And I developed a relationship with the legal team and with some of the plaintiffs, some of those original plaintiffs, Kelsey Juliana, who's in this story, and Xittesca Martinez and Jamie Lynn Butler, were all on these state cases back in 2011. So when the new case was filed in 2015, I was kind of there, and it was an opportune moment for me to, when they had their first win, to say to Julia, hey, can you give me exclusive access to this? And there was trust already built and relationships that were already there. So it was an easy transition for me to move into this story.
Very nice. And how did you, to Olivia's point of, when you say a film about climate change, it's like you expect it to be depressing and dark and sad and we're all doomed, but this film kind of does the opposite of that. Even though it's like a pretty dense with litigation, all those processes, there's still so much joy and hope in it. Were you aware of this yourself, thinking about like, I have to make this palatable, hopeful, uplifting? Was that like a conscious decisions, like throughout the film, like how you were presenting it, how you were editing it? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad you found the film hopeful and inspiring. And yes, I mean, I was making this film because I was so inspired by these young people and what they were doing in the innovative, novel approach to, fighting, basically this approach of connecting our environmental justice issues with our constitutional rights. And I find the story in and of itself very compelling and motivating to think about a new way to think about our democracy and about the role of our government and what that means for us as citizens. But having said that, the reality of climate change and the reality of this daunting journey that these kids have been on through this court case has been challenging and depressing at times, and not always super upbeat. And so we knew with the story that we wanted it to end and to build towards a momentum. And we also knew that this case has inspired cases around the world, at least 20 cases around the world that Our Children's Trust is actively involved in supporting, as well as many other cases where young people around the world are using their constitution to fight for their livable future rights in their courts. So we really felt like that was a hopeful message to end the film on, regardless of where the case is. The case is still in the courts. It's not over with yet, but we knew we couldn't follow the case all the way to the very end because it could be another 5 or 6 years. Wanted to get the story out, but wanted to leave the story really with a powerful message that hopefully people feel like they want to engage in this and they feel inspired to join the movement and to support young people and to really see that it's like there's something growing here and there's something shifting.
And in your editing, how did you think around that balance between the litigation process, the case progressing, and also having these very intimate and like fun and quirky moments with each of the characters and diving into their background as well? I mean, it must have been a beast to edit, because I imagine you must have have shot so much. How did you whittle that down and created that balance in the end?
Yeah, you're asking all the right questions. We had, I think probably 250 hours of original footage, and like, I don't know, it was over 400 hours of archival content that we had to sift through. My editors were amazing, Lyman Smith and Tony Hale. I had 2 editors that worked through the post-production process with us on this. And we were, very early when we sat down to edit, we were luckily together for my in-house residency at the Jacob Burns Film Center. And we were able to we realized at one point that the best way for us to piece this story together, the 3-act structure, was for us to think about the elements of standing that you need to prove in a court of law, which in this case, in a constitutional case, you have to prove that, actually in any case, you have to prove that you have been harmed. You have to prove that the defendant has caused that harm, and you have to prove that the courts can provide a remedy or a relief. And so for us, that became the 3 acts of the film. The first act focuses on the harm that these young people are experiencing and why it's a constitutional harm. The second act focuses on the history of what has the government engaged in and how did we get to where we are? What did they do? And the third act really focuses on what can the courts do? And once we figured that out, all of those complicated elements kind of seemed to find their shape. Rather than it feeling like 3 storylines that we weren't quite sure how to weave together, it became this through line where every intimate plaintiff story that we brought in helped to move the case forward and helped to prove that these 3 acts that we were, these 3 acts, elements of standing that we were trying to show with the film.
Wow. And how long did, well, you started very early on, but how often did you go film? Did they give you a ring? You have to come film this? Were you living with them? How did it work logistically?
Yeah, well, and it's also tricky because these plaintiffs are from all over the US. And we, a lot of times, with a court case, I had no schedule. I didn't know when decisions were going to come down. I didn't have any control over climate events and when those things were going to happen. So it definitely was a lot of, which I think a lot of documentary filmmakers would say that they, that's a typical struggle of when you're following a live story, you don't have a lot of control over where it's going. But so we just had to be very flexible. I spent a lot of time with the plaintiffs together when they would convene, coming together for hearings or events that they were speaking engagements or workshops that they were doing. I was there. I was with them. I was friends with them. I was spending time with them to build that trust and to be there for those more intimate moments of them just being kids together. And, I live in Montana, so it's maybe a little bit central, and, it's a 14-hour drive to Eugene, so I could hop in my car with my gear and be there when I needed to. And yeah, I don't know. It was just a lot of, I think over the 5 years of filming it, it was just having to be flexible and nimble and try to make it work. If it was something that I really felt like it was important, I needed to cover, then do whatever we could do to make it work.
Christy also employed other methods too. So you'll see that the plaintiffs are doing some iPhone footage for us. So if there's a moment of something immediately happen, can you get the plaintiffs to sort of video diary about it or capture that, or ask their families to capture it? So that was a way of being able to get some of those moments that are happening then and there that we couldn't be there for. Same with some of Levi experiencing evacuations for hurricanes. So you sort of think from a producing side of things, how are you going to get these story elements that you need, where either A, you don't have the budget to get there, or B, just time and circumstance doesn't allow you to be in the with everybody. And again, the plaintiffs are spread out. So even if there's a big moment or announcement around the case and you've got the plaintiffs all over the country, you can't be there with every one of them. So we chose some of those methods too.
Yeah, that sounds really smart, and it worked out really well because it's very effective. It does feel like you're everywhere all the time with everybody. And in your filmmaking, because you are also the cinematographer of the project.
One of many.
One of many, including the plaintiffs. So what's your approach because you have a film to make, so you have a slightly different agenda maybe than the rest of the people. How do you manage your needs, your film's needs, and your subject's needs, and the circumstance, like what's going on around you? Are you a fly on the wall? Are you saying, can you do this? Or are you pulling people to the side? Like, how are you managing all of that?
Yeah, and there's also not just the film's needs and like the personal, interaction needs, but there's also the legal needs, right? All of these kids are plaintiffs in a federal lawsuit against the government. So there were times that it was appropriate for me to turn the camera off. And maybe it would have made great filmmaking or great, storyline, or created more drama or whatever, but it wasn't appropriate. And it would have, either, jeopardized, I never wanted to do anything that would jeopardize the plaintiffs and their role as plaintiffs in the case, or do anything to jeopardize the case. So, in some moments, it was more appropriate for me just not to film and to just be there and to be a witness and to be, just being part of the family, so to speak. But it was also, I was always thinking about it coming from the producer director side of, I have to capture as much as I can, and what elements do I need to capture? And I probably overshot, to some degree on a lot. I mean, the ratio to what I captured to what's on screen is ginormous. But it also allowed us, it provided us with a lot of material to pull from.
It's not that ginormous, Christy. I've worked on films that have a lot higher shooting ratio. Yours was pretty pretty tame.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I don't know. It was just, really trying to figure out what was appropriate in the moment and how much footage do we need, and what were the storylines that I guess, felt like was important to cover. I didn't need to cover everything. I needed to be able to cover certain moments and have those connections to the plaintiffs and to our, to the legal team, and to basically get the information that we needed.
And how was your working relationship as producing partners? Like, is it like you take care of this, I take care of that, or are you together? Like, how does it work for you?
Well, when I joined the project, Christy, as I said earlier, had been carrying this load by herself. So really, when I came on board, took over as a lead producer, which freed Christy up to focus more on the role of a director and especially as we were transitioning into the edit room too, being able to take most of those producing tasks off Christy's plate and free her up to really tackle the story and working with the editors. So it just was really natural, actually. There wasn't so much of an actual divvying up of tasks as just stepping into the roles that just sort of, I guess, fit. And really trying to take some of that off Christy. So it worked really well. And Christy's a natural producer too. So it was a true partnership. And it has worked out really well.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's just, it's basically been just like we both kind of step in and step up and whatever needs to be done. But Olivia did a really great job of, in particular during the post process, when I was really needed to work every day with the editors or with the composer or with the graphic animator and, all of these creative decisions that were happening. Olivia was so amazing at helping to create that space and time for me to not have to worry about everything else. So I could just really be focused on story.
That's great. And what did you feel like to be the biggest challenges of making a film like this, a long-winded film with all these complications? What were kind of the biggest obstacles in your path, or like for your next project, are you thinking, oh, I would never do that again, or that was a big mistake? Or
I think as a documentary filmmaker, you say you'll never do it again.
Right, every time.
But you do.
I don't know, Olivia and I both we can like bounce back and forth, I guess. Trying to cover a story so complex with so much travel and commitments that I had to make. If I was going to tell the story, I had to be there, right? Regardless of whether or not I had funding. That was a challenge. The funding element for the first few years was really challenging. I think also following a legal case and, as I mentioned before, not having any control over the schedule or the decisions or anything. And I think also determining when to stop. Like when was the moment that it was like, okay, like we've captured what we've captured. Let's put the story together and to feel confident that we had the story, we had the ending, and we had, like the trajectory of where we were going. Those and managing 21 characters, more than 21 characters, the legal team, the families,
I was going to say that it's like holding the relationships, right? And maintaining those relationships of 21 young people, their families, the legal team, making sure that the trust remains intact throughout. That's a big job. And it's a really rewarding part of making a film like this because of those relationships that you build and maintain. But it's also a challenge when you're thinking of the tasks, all the other tasks that it requires to put together a feature-length film.
How did you make the decision of, okay, now this project has matured enough and it's time to release it to the world? When was that turning point?
Olivia basically told me we're done.
I'm not sure if that's entirely true. I think it was more natural than that. The case has moments in time, and you recognize that you do have, say, an ending. Ultimately, we would have loved this version of the film to have gone to trial, for that timeline of the case to work with sort of a timeline of the film. But you also are looking at this issue and you're thinking, this is an urgent issue. And this, knowing the slow move of the justice system, as it could take another 5 or 6 years or more for this case to truly resolve. Hopefully that means by going to trial. So you look back and you think, okay, we've got the footage, we have the characters, we have a developed story, and it's time to get the story out in the world. So let's get into the edit room and work towards, that post-production timeline. And as you're in the edit room, you can still pick up pieces. And we remained nimble enough that if something was going to happen with the case, that we could go shoot that and work it into the story as it needed to be. And hopefully, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, and we knew that there was going to be a new administration, and
Right.
and that kind of felt like a goalpost for us, that regardless of who was elected, we knew that there was work to do, and that this film and the story needed to be out there so that we could do that impact work. And so, we premiered at DACA NYC last November, shortly after the elections, not knowing who was going to be our next president and who the next administration was going to be. But we kind of had projected forward, when we kind of went into post-production, knowing, okay, that's about when our film is going to be done. And, this will serve hopefully an impactful purpose.
And I'd love to know a little bit more about the social impact campaign that you're running alongside the release of the film. How is the film affecting that, and how is the campaign affecting the film?
Yeah, so our impact campaign is our primary mission is to empower and support young people to hold their government accountable on the climate crisis. And by government, we mean, anything from your local school board to your city, county commissioners, state representatives, to all the way up to the executive branch. That there's all of these areas, all these levels of government where young people can plug in and have their voice heard. And, also empowering the older generations who are responsible for this issue to step up and support these young people and to provide platforms for them and provide that needed support. So that's kind of our overarching goal. And in order to achieve that goal, we have, a national outreach campaign that we're doing. Really, to be able to do this work, folks need to understand that they have a constitutional right to a safe and stable future, and to understand, I guess, the elements of this case, and why it's such a landmark case. So there's a lot of outreach that needs to go into that. We have an educational track as part of our impact campaign. We have a government awareness and outreach track, as well as really hoping to work locally in several states that where this film can be useful as a tool to help drive some change.
And what I want to know as my last question, what's next for the case for your subjects, and what's next for you guys, in addition to, I'm sure, keeping on with the campaign that you have running, but in terms of filmmaking, what's next?
So the case, right now, the plaintiffs, they had a hearing in June that we are waiting a decision on. They have asked the courts if a permission to amend their complaint so that it's more in line with how the Ninth Circuit Court ruled. The Ninth Circuit Court saw that they agreed that their constitutional rights were violated and that the government had violated their rights. And so now the plaintiffs are asking the courts to focus in on their declaratory relief that they're seeking. If Judge Aiken rules in their favor, which we think is highly likely, this will send the case back on the trajectory towards trial. The plaintiffs also, the defendants have been ordered to partake in settlement discussions with the plaintiffs. That's been happening since June, confidential discussions. So there's a big opportunity actually for the Biden administration through a court-supported resolution to enact a progressive climate agenda that would be supported by the courts, that could not be undermined by a future administration through executive actions or legislative actions. So, it's a really actually amazing and exciting time right now with the case to see where it's going to go. And, if it's able to go back to trial, get on the track to trial, that's amazing. All the evidence will be presented. The plaintiffs will be able to testify. All of the experts can testify. But also, if the Biden administration chooses to settle, that's an amazing opportunity as well.
And then from the filmmaking side of it, both of us are developing ideas and pitching ideas and looking forward to what the next project would be. So even as I joke that you sort of want to hang up your hat after each project, it's like so exciting to think about another subject and sinking your teeth into something. Doing what we do as filmmakers and trying to bring to light some stories that interest us and we feel are like good things to shine a light on, and at the same time continue to guide Youth v. Gov into the world and the impact work. So it's kind of sort of exciting moments, really.
Yeah, it is certainly exciting, and we really do look forward to what you guys will come up with next. I do want to put out there the website. I think we have your website on our website, but if you don't mind mentioning that again for our audience.
Sure. So folks can go to youthvgovfilm.com. They can learn more about the case, about the plaintiffs. We also have a Take Action button there where folks can learn more about our impact campaign and join us.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Film with our audience. Thank you.